Hello, I'm Mike Ford, a solicitor here in Wrigleys Charities and Social Economy team, and welcome back to the Wrigleys podcast series aimed at breaking down employee ownership and discussing why it might be the right option for your business. In our last episode, we looked at how employee ownership can work to safeguard the future of the company and how this impacts on management. Today is our final podcast in the 2023 EO series, and we shall be taking a look at the employee ownership trust itself. We've touched on this in our 3 earlier podcast sessions. For ease, we're going to refer to this simply as the EOT for the remainder of this episode. The EOT is used in indirect or hybrid ownership structures, but can also be used to initially set up the direct ownership structure, to allow the outgoing owners to sell their shares and provide for a longer time period following the sale for the shares to be divested amongst the employees in one of the preferred methods, by gift, purchase, or option, and structured by way of a share incentive plan, a save-as-you-earn options plan, a company share options plan, or under an enterprise management incentive scheme. The EOT will be incorporated and created by way of a trust deed, which will set out the terms by which the trust must be operated. As we detailed in the first podcast of the series, the trustee of the EOT will usually be a company, and we would always advise this. The reason for this being a company instead of a group of individuals is that it makes ownership and management of the assets held by the EOT significantly easier and cheaper to maintain. Shares are put into the name of the trustee company and remain there, notwithstanding any change in its directors. The directors are usually known as trustee directors, to distinguish them from the directors of the underlying trading company. The trustee company allows the trustee directors to rotate, retire, and be added to from time to time, with little administrative burden other than updating the company's statutory books and making the necessary filings at Companies House. It also means that signing any documentation is much simpler than if you have many individual trustees. The EOT itself will be operated and run by its trustee directors, according to the rules set out in the trust deed and the articles of association of the corporate trustee, and those of the trading company to a lesser extent. The role of the trustee director is to manage the assets of the trust, which are the shares, for the benefit of the beneficiaries as a whole, which in this case will be the present and future employees of the company. The trustee role is therefore not to manage the underlying trading company. This remains with management and the directors, and our 3rd podcast in this series discussed how this can be dealt with. The trustee role is instead to influence the management team in its capacity as the long-term shareholder of the company, to ensure that the company is being led in the best way possible and that they are maximising the engagement and experience of the employees. A common question that arises is what happens if the EOT decides to sell the shares? Usually this is not the intention when setting up the EOT and transitioning to employee ownership, which has a longer-term goal of sustainability and success for the company. But there may be situations in which management and the employees do wish to explore this option, and this will almost always be after any deferred consideration has been paid to the founder or initial outgoing shareholders at the outset of the EO's transition. In the 2nd episode of this series, we discussed how, subject to certain statutory conditions, the outgoing shareholder selling to the trust could obtain an exemption from capital gains tax on the value of the shares sold into the trust. It's important to note, as we did then, that this capital gains tax liability is not extinguished here, and instead it passes to the trust and remains attached to the value of the shares. It will therefore become due and payable by the trust if it ever decided to sell on the shares. This is key to note because the capital gains tax could be significant if the value of the businesses continue to rise, as the tax will be calculated from the date on which the original owner who sold the shares to the trust acquired them, and this may be on foundation of the company for the nominal value. It's not based on the calculation of the value of the shares on the date on which the EOT acquired them. The capital gains tax liability will fall to the EOT to settle and cannot be claimed back by the EOT from the previous owner. This is one of the reasons that employee ownership is seen as a long-term solution for the company in question, since it's not an efficient way of selling on the company in the short term, following any rapid expansion or development. If the shares are sold by the EOT, then the Articles of Association and the trust documents will cover how the value of the shares, once the tax liabilities have been settled, can be distributed. This can be amongst the employees or past employees as beneficiaries of the EOT, but there are also situations in which the articles and EOT documents may envisage that instead some or all of the funds should be applied for charitable or other purposes. This is a commercial decision for the company and the employees to be agreed during the process of setting up the EO structure. We hope you found this podcast series useful and enlightening. If you'd like to know more, or if you're considering employee ownership for your company, please do not hesitate to contact one of the Wrigleys EO team members. Our contact details are available at wrigleys.co.uk/EO. Thank you.